I've always had doubts, and I have spoken publicly about this, about whether it would really, in the end, work out that the Americans would transfer these highly enriched uranium nuclear-powered submarines to Australia, which has no nuclear experience at all, even civil nuclear experience.
We're joined by Lord Ricketts, Peter Ricketts, who was the UK government's first national security advisor. Peter, welcome to the programme this evening.
Hi.
Hello there. The Chancellor talked of the need to deliver the priorities of the British people, security and a strong Britain in a changing world, she said. But despite that rise that she said in MOD spending, we know the government has still not put a timescale to raise that budget even more to 3%. What are the dangers, in your view, of failing to do that when we've had calls from Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, and others, including Donald Trump, of course, of upping spending to maybe 5%?
Yes, and we've just had a strategic defence review led by George Robertson, which made a very convincing case for a serious increase in investment in defence, which means a bigger budget, and which was based around the assumption that this would get to 3% of GDP early in the 2030s, in the next parliament. We didn't get that today in Chancellor's statement. We got basically a confirmation of what we already knew, that the spending would rise to 2.5% in 2027, with a little bit extra, taking it 2.6% for the intelligence community. I mean, that, I'm afraid, is way short of where people will expect Keir Starmer to be when he goes to the NATO summit in 2 weeks' time. As you say, Mark Rutte has come up with this formula of 3.5% of GDP on hard defence and 1.5% on infrastructure and intelligence and cyber security, things around defence capability to make 5%. And all that Keir Starmer can go with is 2.5 or 2.6%. And a vague undertaking, it might get to 3% when things are better. I don't think that's going to be good enough. I think it's an excellent defence review, but the money isn't yet there for it.
And of course, those defence increases are funded by cutting international aid. Do you think, Peter, that brings its own problems in terms of reducing the UK soft power potential in an increasingly dangerous world?
I certainly do. I mean, it was a great national asset, our development programme, our DFID ministry, and we were respected around the world. And of course, the totality of security is not just defence. Defence is important, but to deliver political effect with the military instruments, you need a foreign office, well funded, and you need a development budget. The foreign office has also taken, I think, a bit of a hit in this, partly because of the reduction of the development spending, but they're on a very tight settlement as well. So to cut development, which is part of building security in the world and preventing conflict, and increase defence spending isn't coherent to me. I understand all the pressures, but really we ought to be looking at that security and defence budget in the round and making sure our soft as well as hard power is ready for the challenges.
I wonder if I can invite a comment from you. I mean, this story has just come in. It's on the front page of the Times and on the Financial Times, saying that the nuclear submarine deal that was struck between the US, the UK and Australia is now under threat because the Pentagon has launched a review of it at a time of heightened tensions with China. Let me just tell you what the FT says. Ending the submarine and advanced technology development deal would destroy a pillar of security cooperation between the allies. The skeptics of the nuclear technology sharing pact in the United States are questioning whether the US should help Australia obtain submarines if there isn't a commitment to use them in any war with China. And the Pentagon says it's reviewing Aukus in order to ensure this initiative of the previous administration is aligned with the president's America First agenda. I know I've sort of sprung this on you, but do you have any thoughts about that story that's just developing?
Well, I think it's another illustration of how Trump sees everything through his own perspective and a very narrow focus on American national interest drawn very tightly, because this was a deal that was going to enhance a wider alliance, UK, America, Australia. To be absolutely honest, I've always had doubts, and I have spoken publicly about this, about whether it would really, in the end, work out that the Americans would transfer these highly enriched uranium nuclear-powered submarines to Australia, which has no nuclear experience at all, even civil nuclear experience. I mean, this is a very, very advanced and sensitive technology. The British have undertaken to build the boats, the submarines. There was an announcement of 12 submarines being built in the UK. A number of those were intended for the Australians, but it would, I think, be the Americans who'd be supplying the propulsion. And so I'm not totally surprised that the Americans are now thinking again about the technologies that would be involved in bringing Australia into that very small circle of countries that use naval nuclear propulsion. So all up in the air again. Remember that we pushed the French out of a contract to supply French submarines, conventionally powered, in order for this Aukus deal to be struck. And now the closer people look at it, the more there are doubts about it. So we'll see how it turns out. I would be surprised if the outcome of all this is in the end that Australia gets the latest nuclear-powered submarines from either the US or the UK, frankly.
So the tensions, the heightened tension with China is at the back of that story. But of course, we've got the tensions continuing with Russia, haven't we? Attempts at ceasefire talks in Ukraine have come to nothing. There is expectation that it could be discussed at this weekend's meeting of the G7 in Canada. And interestingly, Peter, at Prime Minister's Questions today, the Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Ed Davey, asked for this measure to be considered as a way of putting pressure on the Russians. Just take a listen.
The Prime Minister is right to increase defence spending, and later we'll hear the difficult choices the Chancellor has had to make, partly to fund that defence expenditure. But there are £25 billion of frozen Russian assets in the UK right now, billions that could be used to stop Putin's war machine and to boost Britain's defence industry even faster. So at the G7 this weekend, will the Prime Minister try to seek an agreement to seize those frozen Russian state assets and use them to support Ukraine?
Well, as he knows, that is an issue that's being considered, but it is complicated, and there are a lot of countervailing factors that need to be carefully balanced in a decision that can be made. We are talking to allies about it, but I don't want to pretend to the House that there's an easy answer on this, because there isn't.
Indeed, it is complicated. And at the moment, the EU and the UK, they say they use the interest from the assets, but not the assets themselves. Can you shed any light, Peter, on why the assets themselves can't be used?
Well, let me try. As you say, we agreed last year that there would be a 50 billion euro investment pot, which would be drawn from the interest that's accrued on these roughly 200 billion euros of Russian assets frozen in Europe and some small amount in America. But that leaves the actual assets frozen, just uses the interest. Seizing the assets themselves, which would of course yield much more for reinvestment in Ukraine, has been an issue around for some time. It was even being looked at during Lord Cameron's time in the Foreign Office. The UK and Canada, I think, have been particularly interested in it. Others have been more reticent. Reticent because it would be forfeiture or seizure under international law. I'm not a lawyer, but I think that there are difficulties about that. And people are worried that it might frighten off other investors, particularly investors who keep a lot of their funds in euros, for example, China. And the largest stash of Russian frozen assets is in Belgium, because Belgium hosts this Euroclear system, which is an asset swapping system. And the Belgians, I think, are very anxious that if they seize that huge pile of Russian assets, it might frighten off other people who might use otherwise the euro as a currency of deposit. So I think that's one of the issues. But I do think that the momentum is building to do this. Chancellor Merz of Germany has come out recently in favor of it. So I could see that among the Europeans and Canadians it might happen. I don't think it makes much sense to do it just the Brits alone. If it's going to have real impact, it needs to be wider. Frankly, I disagree with Ed Davey about using Canada G7 meeting to do it. That would seem to me the worst place to do it, because certainly Donald Trump won't be on board for that. And to launch a deal at the G7, in front of Donald Trump from the other G7 members would be very provocative. So yes, I think that we should push ahead trying to make that happen. Certainly Ukraine needs the money. Russia, after all, has launched an illegal invasion, and this would be appropriate compensation for it, but don't do it in front of Donald Trump, because that would just add one more strand to the divisiveness and division between us and the Americans on Ukraine.
Peter Ricketts, Lord Ricketts, thanks very much for joining me this evening.